Requiem aeterna.
Hi there, this is Brent.
And this is Amanda,
We are the Unreliable Narrators.
here to talk about the strangeness, the mystery, and the wonder of Gene Wolfe's prose.
What is time?
What is memory?
What is a person?
Is this reality?
Where are we?
Do we exist?
Have you ever considered that all your choices were what brought you right here to this very moment?
Episode number 25, Bibliomen, 20 Characters Waiting for a Book. First published by Cheap Street in 1984, and then republished in an expanded version by Broken Mirrors Press in 1995.
We have John Kinder Price today.
Yes, we do. John Kinder Price, and then a few more of his friends before we're done with today's. What do you think about John Kinder Price?
Well, going into this, before we start, one thing I do want to call out is I think that this one has the most Lovecraftian overtones to it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and then I have a couple of questions for you at the end.
Oh, good. Trick questions. Okay. So going into this, I wasn't thinking of Lovecraft, although I think that does resonate. For me, I enjoy him as a character because here we have Gene Wolfe calling out something that is very true of paper people or book people, which is the delight in the hunt, the love of the hunt. So I've been thinking about the throwback that this is, sort of historical artifact that this story is, where he is hunting around in all of the local bookshops and for 100 miles around and sending letters to strange countries like the Congo Free State, and I think Bithynia was also mentioned, or Persia.
All three of them.
Okay. And just thinking about the difference even 20 years has made in the book hunting business and trying to find something obscure. But the delight that a bibliophile has in the hunt for a book makes the premise of the story extremely plausible. So just in summary, it's a story about John K. Kinder Price, who works in a shoe factory, gets married, has a child. Both his child and his wife die. He tries a number of different hobbies, ends up with the hobby of looking for one particular book. And what kind of book, maybe we'll leave for a little bit, and then looks for it for a long time and then disappears.
Yeah. So with his hobbies, it was in 1939. So his wife died in 1938. So this is at the tail end of the Depression in World War II, where people know stuff's going on. So that's when he starts doing shipbuilding and stamp collecting.
Yes. Some classic middle-aged man hobbies.
Yeah, midlife crisis.
Exactly.
I watched, my dad had a friend who got into the shipbuilding inside a glass bottle.
Yes.
And I watched him do that one time. It was very tedious.
I imagine so. It does seem like there are a lot of hobbies that their defining characteristic or their attractive characteristic is the fact that they are very tedious, repetitive, and simple.
Yeah. We came back to visit that friend, I think it was a year or two later, and he was just finishing the ship inside the bottle.
That you had seen before.
Mm-hmm.
That does not seem like fun to me at all.
Yeah.
But then there are lots of hobbies people do that, cross-stitching where you're just counting and it's like paint by numbers, but slower.
Well, he was saved because he got into books.
Yay!
So in 1939, he announced to a friend that he had discovered a pastime that would hold his interest for the remainder of his life.
I love that he can predict that.
Searching for a book of spells mentioned in a pulp magazine he had happened upon in a barber shop. When his friend ventured to point out that the book so mentioned might not in fact exist, Price told him he was sure it did not, and it was this certainty of its non-existence that underlay the charm of the search.
Yes, because the book did not exist, he could neither fail nor end the search by discovering a copy. So he doesn't just get into books, he gets into a book, a non-existent book.
Mm-hmm. This is where I was assuming the Lovecraft influence here, because I thought that this was the Necronomicon.
Yes, that seems like a pretty obvious interpretation.
Yeah, because my first encounter, because I came to this backwards, because it's the Army of Darkness was where I first encountered the Necronomicon.
I'm sorry, podcast listeners, you probably are all following Brent, but I'm going to have to declare my ignorance. The what led you to the Necronomicon?
Oh, I thought you had seen this. It's a horror comedy.
Oh, okay. You thought I had seen this. It's a movie and you thought I had seen it?
It's out there enough. So
We've watched like 8 movies together, and that's about half the movies I've ever seen.
So Bruce Campbell, he gets sent back in time to the Middle Ages. So he's a clerk, like in a hardware store. And so he goes back in time. He has a shotgun, his boomstick.
Oh, I think I've heard you describe this before.
And
okay.
So
I remember the shotgun part.
Yeah, so he has to go get the Necronomicon, but he has to say a spell to remove it from the shelf that it's on. And he gets there and he can't remember the last few words.
Excellent.
So he mumbles them.
And does it release it?
That's what causes the zombie, like the Evil Dead.
Oh, no. Okay.
So then I went back and started reading Lovecraft.
What's this Necronomicon thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I had is it a conventional introduction to the Necronomicon? In the woods reading Lovecraft.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's all the pop culture that surrounds this because people, as practical jokes, have placed it in library catalogs.
Just to get other people interested.
Yeah. And it's kind of an Easter egg if you go out and if you search university libraries or various other institutions. Some of them have the Necronomicon in there.
As a listing.
Yeah, and some of them have fairly detailed descriptions where
that's fun.
Yeah, you can tell a fan has gone through and collated all the different descriptions.
Okay. Well, I have a relative by marriage who has been, intermittently working on a project for a long time to print and bind off some kind of Necronomicon type book. And they purchased a plastic molded cover that looks like human skin. Anyway, it's quite an elaborate thing. So if he ever gets around to getting it together, it'll look, I think, cool on the shelf or creepy on the shelf. But yeah.
From your description, that's probably the one from the Evil Dead.
Okay. And that would probably be where he would have encountered it from. And that's a movie, right?
Yes. Lovecraft himself, multiple times in letters, he said that if anyone were to try to write the Necronomicon, it would just be a disappointment. He never tried compiling anything, and he encouraged other people not to. But of course, people have.
Yeah, but it definitely is one of those things. It's the horror movie, don't show the monster kind of thing. The description of it or the theory of it would be more interesting than the reality, because you'd have to have Lovecraftian belief, I think, to be actually creeped out by what it is or what someone had managed to come up with.
Yeah.
Anyway, so our little story here continues. During the following years, Price became a familiar figure in all the libraries and bookstores within 100 miles of Dalton. I have "ha" here in my margin because that seems about appropriate, I think.
Yeah, I wish we had a number of bookstores within 100 miles of us.
I know. This is where the Unreliable Narrators are extra grateful for the digital age and our ability to access booksellers' websites from our isolated metropolitan location where there isn't another city within, I think the nearest city is over 300 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you already alluded to this, but he's sending letters to there's the Congo Free State, Persia, and Bithynia?
I pronounced it Bithynia, but I don't know if that's correct. That seems phonetic, at least.
Yeah, that's probably more correct. That's what listeners are here for, to listen to me mispronounce things.
Well, we can go over this another time, but when you mispronounce things, that just means that you're self-taught. It's probably fine.
But what I wanted to point out is that by this point in history, so in the Congo Free State did not exist. So it was dissolved in 1908 and when it became the Belgian Congo. And then with Persia, that's more of the ancient name.
For Iran.
Mm-hmm. And then Bithynia, that would be more in Turkey now. He's writing letters to countries, says they're little known localities, but they're also historical ones that do not exist in his time period.
Yeah, so I felt like part of the joke here is that they're, quote, little known localities, despite the fact that the Congo Free State and the Belgian Congo, one of the largest territories in the world, the largest African state. Persia is not little known. I don't know if you've ever heard of this one guy, Alexander the Great. There was this whole thing about a conflict between Persia and, what was it? Oh, yeah, Greece. And there was maybe a somewhat famous battle or three that were fought. That little known locality, it's like, okay, well, in Dalton, maybe people aren't as familiar, or it just seems like a somewhat layered joke.
No, I'll agree with that. I was just drawn to the fact that possibly he was communicating to people not in his time.
Yeah, I was going to say, these are seem like they're time travel letters as well as space travel. Not space, but three-dimensional space traveling letters.
So, and then we get the entry of the United States into World War II must have made Price's activities more difficult, but he appears to have continued them.
Yeah, so worldwide war would definitely make the communication more difficult, travel more difficult, and then you've just got all of this disruption. So then in 1952, a neighbor reports to the police that she had not seen Price in over a week and that there were no lights in the windows of his house. And so that's very characteristic of either a small town or a close-knit neighborhood where somebody notices. And so the nosy neighbor notices that he doesn't seem to be around. And so they break down the door.
Yeah, well, because he's a widower and they assume the worst, but he's not there.
Yeah, he's not there. The door was forced, but no body was discovered. Nobody. I mean, it's spelled no body, but nobody was discovered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then left vacant, the house was vandalized several times. It burned in 1959. So clearly we had no heirs swooping in to take care of this.
Yeah. So earlier in 1957, a retired soul cutter.
Great job title.
Yeah.
Sorry, remember, he worked at a shoe factory.
Yeah. Soul cutter. He worked in social media.
Also time traveling long before it had been invented.
Who had known Price as a foreman, had reported seeing him near the Dartmouth campus. And he is said to have been spotted in 1961 and 62 and later at garage sales in and around Boston.
Yeah, so his life is continuing somehow. At least he's doing the Elvis thing and showing up random places. Random in that they don't seem necessarily connected in any particular way other than, yes, we can find books.
Yeah, and he's completely left his home, abandoned.
Yes. And then the last paragraph of the story, the most recent sighting, 1977, which incidentally would make him 104 years old, was in the stacks of the British Museum Library, from which he vanished before he could be apprehended. It is conjectured that Price has still not discovered the book he seeks, but he appears to have found something.
Yeah. And that's where the Lovecraftian, because several of the places that he goes to, they're in New England. And then with the British Museum Library, that's I forget which story it features in now, but that's in some of the Lovecraft stories.
Yeah, so he's hunting for some great and secret knowledge, and he's hunting in a wide variety of places. including the very mundane, which is something may be in someone's attic, something may show up in a garage sale or at an auction, and the esoteric buried in the archive of some of the oldest libraries.
Yeah. You already mentioned here that he's 104.
Yes.
I have a question.
Okay.
Our previous character, Adam Poor, he has no known date of birth.
Yes.
And no known date of death. However, the novel that he wrote is about somebody who's gone mad and is possibly dead and hears voices, or they're traveling in a tunnel. Do you think Adam Poor could be Price?
Okay, I believe that all claws are sacred claws. No, wait. I didn't have that interpretation, but I feel like this is where we talked about this, I think, on a previous episode, where we're in a shared universe. The approach to this text of it's just a collection of characters waiting for a book. That's the subtitle is, I think, deliberately misleading. Not that Wolfe would ever do that. These are characters that are in a shared world. And so this is a world where people can disappear.
Yeah.
And unnaturally prolong their lives and travel between dimensions. Anyway, I'm just going to double down on my original interpretation of Wolfe. I don't know if I'm pretty sure I've said this on the podcast before, that we live in the connected Wolfe universe. It is this strange. So I didn't go with Price is poor.
Okay, so part of the reasons that I asked that is he's last seen over in the British Museum, and then Poor could be from Sark.
Yes.
Which would be next to the United Kingdom, part of the United Kingdom. And then Poor's novel seems to have to do with somebody going mad or possibly in and out in the spirit realm to some extent. And then if there are Lovecraftian vibes here where he's abandoned his life and is now wandering and searching for what I assume to be the Necronomicon.
Yeah. So the way I went with this, my interpretation is that he found a book of spells, not the book of spells that was in the magazine. So whether that book of spells was the Necronomicon or some other book of spells, and he found either some other book of spells or the Necronomicon. So I'm not sure which would be in which position.
Mm-hmm.
So I took that he vanished before he could be apprehended. I took that quite literally. He vanished. He has obtained some magical ability from whatever the something is that he found.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's a fair interpretation.
Okay. I don't know. 2 thumbs up for John Price?
Yeah. I did enjoy this one.
Like I said at the beginning, I think the thing I enjoyed most about this character is that we have this experience. We know lots of people who have had this experience. The hunt for a book is a catalyst for adventures. You can be looking for a copy of a book and it gets lost by the postal service. And next thing you know, you're starting a small press to reprint it. Just to mention some random example.
Uh-huh. So next we have Paul Rico.
Yeah, this one is interesting. Tell me what you make of it, because this is a short story about a graffiti artist.
Yeah, couple of things here. One, just a kind of touch point with a previous Wolfe work. They're in Why Private War. There's the graffiti artist in there. He not a main character, but the character sees his graffiti on the men's restroom wall. There may be other, I'm thinking a Long Sun too, and you have the Silk for Calde graffiti. Yes. And there may be other aspects to it that I haven't run across or not remembering.
Those are good connections to previous Wolfe works, and I think that's helpful to call that out because it does feel a little out of place. Kind of in the same way that the Spinning Jenny story felt a little out of place because it is literally textual, but definitely not the kind of text that you're thinking of, at least at the beginning of this little vignette.
The other thing, too, we haven't talked a whole lot about these, but they're in the cheap street edition of the book. There are little illustrations before each one. And this one has the F word.
Yes, partially blocked out.
Yeah, partially blocked out by a thin, what I assume is a bound book of poetry, and then it's got a spray paint.
Yeah, a can of spray paint concealing the C and most of the K.
Yeah, so he was born in 1960 in New York City, and it says he began to write in 1969, from the first using the dark green that was to become his trademark.
And this throws you right from the beginning, because without the aid of the illustration, you wouldn't know what we're talking about here. Using the dark green what? The dark green crayon? The dark green pen? Oh no, it's dark green spray paint.
And like those of most beginners, his earliest efforts were simple obscenities.
Yep.
In 1971, however, he reached public attention with, quote, "I just got real," end quote.
Beneath this, another hand inquired, "How was she?" question mark.
Rico silenced his critic, not for the last time, with "real good."
Yeah, so we've got some charming graffiti poetry / dialogue here.
Yeah, when he's 11.
Yes, which is a little disturbing.
Yeah, so "I Just Got Real" was followed in rapid succession by "Dracula Sucks," "Mary Poppins Shoots Up," and "Save Dope, Shoot Nixon."
Charming.
Uh-huh. So everything in here, it's like, I don't know what you'd call these, but they're like one sentence poems, essentially.
Yeah, little aphorisms, yeah. I mean, it's literally just what you see on the street, especially the 80s and 90s. Kids these days may not realize just how prevalent graffiti was. Before you could go into a chat room and say all the most horrible things that you could ever think of, before you could, I don't know, hop on some forum known for its violence and obscenity. I won't name them, I don't think, but you spray painted it on overpasses, etc.
Yeah. During the winter of 1973, Rico frequented the restroom of the New York Public Library.
Yay!
Yeah. He was excited by what he saw there and transformed some of the images and ideas to subway cars that were his favored medium.
Yeah, again, this is something that you have to look at some historical photographs to really grasp. In the modern age of ubiquitous surveillance, the New York City subway does not look like it did 30 years ago.
No.
Not even close.
So we have Save Earth, Plute, New Jersey, Jump Kermit, God is Godzilla,
Che does it without class,
and his most magnificent farewell to childhood, Tin Man, Dorothy drinks from his funnel.
I don't know that he had a childhood to say farewell to, but that's one way to go out.
Yep.
His political consciousness grew. Freedom of the walls. Hemlock Hugh Hefner. Up with skirts, in parentheses, a precursor of the women's liberation movement, and support peace or die.
It's funny, but the trajectory here, well, we'll get here. I'm not entirely sure where this lands.
Okay, shall we finish the story?
Yeah.
In 75, one of his graffiti was mentioned in the New York Times. A friend called it to his attention, and the intellectual ambition that had stirred in him from his earliest days, remember here, he's 15, wakened fully. Cool as I is, cool as ice. Wasps a sting, free the 9 worthies, dial a dwarf, ring the Nibelungs, and Perseus is afraid of snakes. So he gets very literary here.
Yeah, because the 9 worthies are the 3 pagan, 3 Jewish, and 3 Christian kings that everyone should aspire to. That one seemed the most obscure reference in there to me.
Then what's dial a dwarf?
Well, that's from the Ring cycle, right?
Okay. Because then the dash there, ring the Nibelungs. I didn't know if there was another reference there that I was missing.
I don't think so, but maybe I glossed over something because I assume I understood it.
Yeah, so this is the dwarvish smith forging weapons. And Perseus is afraid of snakes.
Medusa.
Medusa reference, yeah.
So then we get in 1981. So he's 21 years old.
Woohoo!
Then a senior at NYU.
Yeah.
I assume that's New York University.
Yeah, so whatever his trajectory has been, it's taken him to higher education.
Yeah, and he's become a senior rather quickly.
Yes.
He published a collection of his own unacknowledged writings under the title Training the Mind. Upon seeing a poster advertising his book, he found old impulses impossible to resist. Ducking into a nearby drugstore, he purchased a grease pencil and added a message his copy editor at once altered to hot sheet.
Yeah, so where does this land? You said you don't know where it lands.
That's a good question, because we have what seems to be a troubled youth, but when we get towards the end, it goes from he's being crude and somewhat of a shock artist to then he's making literary references, and then, we find out he's a senior when he's 20 or 21 years old, a senior in college, so he's at least a year ahead. So that seems to say something. And then he's published his own work.
This may not be a great connection, but it put me in mind of, I realized at some point that I'm sure you're familiar with the comedian Dave Chappelle.
Mm-hmm.
And he's maybe not known for his gentle approach to people's sensibilities. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah.
I don't remember if I was listening to a clip of his or if I was reading something about him, but he grew up in very highly educated circles. His mother was a professor, and he was surrounded by people who were movers and shakers in civil rights movement and in the intellectual underpinnings of the civil rights movement. And so he grew up exposed to, and repeatedly, like, he was surrounded by the people who were writing some of the smartest things about racial issues. And so when you listen to his comedy and it's very shocking, I think what's interesting is how sophisticated and subtle and defensible many of his points are. And his jokes are pointed,
Mm-hmm.
often unpleasantly so, but there is something very powerful about very intelligent person going ahead and using a shocking method to communicate. And so Paul Rico seems to me to be this kind of, we're not getting any context of his family or anything, but you're not going to New York University. I mean, it was the 80s, so it was obviously a lot more affordable than it is now, but you're not going to New York University if you're not very intelligent and have the finances to afford it.
Yeah.
And he's spraying graffiti, and that's avant-garde or punk kid, or there's some category we have on that, but he seems to be rooted in something more sophisticated than that.
Yeah.
Or something more sophisticated than the public caricature of that. I think that's what I mean.
Yeah, no, I understood what you meant.
Thank you.
I agree with that. I think that's a good interpretation of it.
I didn't particularly enjoy this one in quite the same way as I did Kinder Price. I'm not getting that sense of, oh, yes, this is another bookish, literate soul that I connect to.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment there. Part of my worry and why I was expressing I wasn't sure where it landed was because I was worried that I missed something here.
Yeah, I'm always worried about that.
Well, yeah.
Not you missing things, me missing things.
Once again, we get a Wolfe character who you may not expect a Midwestern American white middle-aged man to be finding what he's doing to be interesting, because it's very easy to be dismissive of graffiti.
Yes.
And the fact that Wolfe at least sees something of value in some forms of graffiti as an expression that is interesting to me.
Yeah. So the graffiti quotes that we get, there's some interest there, but the fact that Wolfe is finding this interesting and is giving us a light on this is itself interesting. And again, this is maybe tangential and just reflect my interests and concerns, but I think it was Roger Scruton in one of his something that he wrote on beauty a lot and on architectural beauty, and he called graffiti the cry of anguish from the human soul at ugly architecture. And so that shifted my perspective on graffiti because, I grew up with very conventional, that's ugly, that's not art, that's gross. How can people be so vile as to deface things? But typically, not universally, but typically you don't see graffiti on a beautiful building. You don't see graffiti tags on beautiful buildings. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's typically, no, it's big, blank, ugly, gray, cold, dirty alleyways and streets and overpasses. And there is something about it that is refreshing. Like, no, I don't think this looks good. I think I can put something more interesting here. And a punk kid with a spray can actually can put something more interesting because a blank gray wall in an ugly industrialized, there are no pedestrians, there are no open shops. The street is dead.
Mm-hmm.
And some punk kid with a spray can do something that is infinitely more interesting than what was there.
Yeah, that's a good read on it.
So now I'm less resistant to graffiti when I see it in public. Although I am kind of glad that we don't have the 80s and 90s New York subway situation prevailing. I don't know if it's worth committing to a surveillance state.
All right. Our next character.
Yes, third and final for this episode.
Mm-hmm. This is Rishi.
Yes.
And this is another one that's a little... Previously, we had some future characters, and this character is an ancient character.
Yeah, so perhaps born circa 3500 BC, though Sloane says 3300, which is a hilarious thing to quibble about, a 200-year difference over 5,000 years into the past.
Yeah, especially when you're getting on... That's the edge of history.
Yes.
There.
Yeah, a man of the greatest wisdom. He is reported to have spent the last 40 years of his life living in a cave on a mountaintop. By day, he spoke with the gods, by night with the spirits, and with animals and the winds at all times. This is a lovely opening.
Yeah, I really enjoy that last sentence there. In the oldest surviving legend of Rishi, it is said that a certain young man came to him declaring that he sought wisdom, and begging Rishi to tell him how he might become as wise as he. To this, Rishi replied, "My son, it is a matter of no difficulty. Go you down this mountain till you come to the path that runs beside the river. Follow it till you reach the village where the book of wisdom is kept. Study it well, and you will be wise."
Yeah, so you journey to the mountaintop, you ask the wise man how to become holy, and he says it's simple and straightforward. Just go for a walk and then read a book.
A walk downhill.
Yes, a walk downhill beside a river.
Yeah.
It sounds lovely.
"I dislike those paths that run beside rivers," answered the young man, "because of the biting insects one always finds there. Instead, I will follow the road of the purple hills. It may be that it too will lead me to the book of wisdom." And he went away.
Yeah, that's great. That's how young people respond when you give them advice. I like this story, and it resonated for maybe some of my parenting frustrations.
And school teacher
frustrations. Like, look, it's very easy. So I had a student one time turn in her final exam in my course. I was teaching ancient history, literature, and philosophy. And she hadn't done great most of the year, but on her final exam, she did really well. And she seems to have known she had done really well because at the end of the exam, she handwrote, "You're right, Mrs. Patchen. It is easier when you pay attention and take notes.
Oh, wow. That's so basic, I don't even know.
Well, it was a good movement for that student. Also, I hope she's a listener and she recognizes herself and laughs at herself.
So then 10 years later, we have a young woman who wishes for wisdom.
Yeah, nothing could be easier, my daughter. Descend this mountain till you reach the path by the river. There are no insects, or at least very few. Follow the path, read from the book of wisdom, and you will be made wise. I have already seen that side of the mountain, the young woman answered. Now I wish to see the other. And she went away. Exasperating. Back to teaching for a moment, sorry. But, kids' attention spans are shorter, so you need to break up what you say into shorter chunks and shift tasks at least once every 10 minutes. Otherwise, they'll lose focus. Anyway.
Yeah, no, this is like the podcasting subreddit where everybody's on there. Oh, yeah, I've got a podcast. It's long form content. What do I do with Instagram Reels and TikTok videos?
Oh, my goodness. Yes. How can I easily gain an audience on TikTok?
Yeah, if you can't sit through a TikTok video, you're not going to listen to a podcast.
Right. Yeah. All right. And then 10 years later, a man of middle years came to Rishi. I have worked all my life, he said, yet I have nothing to show for all my effort but a very small sack of gold and a house in the town. How shall I satisfy my spirit? You must gain wisdom, Rishi told him. Go down this mountain where the eternal rocks and tumbling streams are so beautiful, a man might wish to see them 1,000 times. Continue till you come to the path by the river. Follow that path to the village where the book of wisdom is, and study it even as I once did. Then you will know the lot of man, and your spirit will be at peace. I know those little river villages, the man said. They haven't 2 coppers to rub together. And he went away. I think this is evidence that young man, young woman, or middle-aged man, we're all fools together. As a middle-aged woman, I'm feeling safe for the moment.
For the moment. One thing there, lot of man is capitalized.
Yes.
Then we have 10 years later.
Yep.
When Rishi was very old, a youth came to him who was so handsome, so bold of bearing, and so bright of eye, that Rishi longed to have him for his disciple from the moment that he saw him. Do you wish wisdom, my son? Rishi called to him. I can tell you how to become as wise as I, and it is very easy.
The youth knelt at his feet. You're too good, great Rishi, he said. It is in search of wisdom that I have come to find you, fording many swift streams and crossing fields of snow. Then go down this mountain, said Rishi, till you come to the path beside the river. Follow it till you reach the village where the book of wisdom is. The villagers are all kindly folk, for they hear that book read every day. Do you also read it, and you will be as wise as I. Hearing and obedience, great Rishi, said the youth. Though I should outlast this mountain, I should be in your debt. And he went away. In the final year of Rishi's life, he who had been the youth returned, and he did not hold himself boldly, nor were his eyes yet bright. Great Rishi, he said, there is no longer a path. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, ouch.
Yeah.
So I do have a few comments.
Yes.
And then I think I know what Wolfe was using as his interpretive framework.
All right, go for it.
So 1, the Book of Wisdom. So there's a canonical book, also known as the Apocrypha, with this title. It's also sometimes titled Wisdom of Solomon. I don't think that it's the book necessarily referenced in the story, but...
Incidentally, it has the same name.
Yeah. But as for the 4 seekers of wisdom, I think that this is modeled after 1 John 2, verses 15 through 17. Because it says, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life, it is not the Father, but from the world. The world is passing away, along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God remains forever. So we have the biting insects.
That's the desires of the flesh.
Mm-hmm. We have the unseen side of the mountain. So the eye is never satisfied in seeing.
Yep.
And then we have the lack of coin.
The pride of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with the youth who comes,
Yes.
he says that there's no longer a path. So the world is passing away.
Yes. And no one seeks wisdom anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It lines up too well.
Yes. That was probably in the lectionary the week that Wolfe wrote this character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll agree with that there because it's just too easy. The other thing that I found interesting is that the advice Rishi gives is the second person. He's like, oh, well, there's no biting insects, but she's more worried about seeing things. And then when the merchant comes, he's like, it's a very interesting view on the path. And the guy's, ah.
I find that progression both interesting and frustrating because part of it feels you can try to adapt your advice. So maybe the great Rishi didn't have as much wisdom as we think because he's one behind, right? So you keep trying to iterate to catch up. And culturally, I think that this makes sense. Like if you're out of the mainstream culture and you're trying to catch up with the mainstream culture, you're going to be an iteration or two behind, which is why in certain rural towns, you still find people wearing hairstyles from the 80s or less so now with ubiquitous media. But certainly if you're not making, if you're not creating, you're behind the curve.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
I really like that connection. I didn't think of that at all. I think that's accurate. Yeah. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, you're welcome. I was hoping I wasn't just randomly like, oh.
No. That seems, it fits very well. And we don't need to go and hunt through photographs of Gene Wolfe's bookshelves to find out whether or not he heard John.
Yeah. As a Catholic, I assume he's familiar with a book called the Bible.
Yeah, I think so. Although there is that joke among some Catholics. Well, I don't read the Bible because I'm Catholic and I don't have to. I think that's a Jim Gaffigan joke. Wolfe, certainly as a convert, a sincere convert and a faithful church attender, would be more than a little bit familiar, I'm quite sure. Even if his Midwest upbringing didn't include lots of Sunday school.
Yeah. Your comment there where I was remembering, I can't remember if I heard something N.T. Wright said or was reading something that he had, but he was lamenting the fact that most Anglican priests
right.
were more familiar with the Gospels from Life of Brian
my goodness.
Yeah, than they were from the actual Gospels.
Well, see, this is where I agree with an assertion you've made before that Life of Brian is not actually blasphemous, because it does introduce people to the story, whether it's a straight introduction or not. And I've probably talked about this before. I know we've personally talked about this before, but showing up at the university when I was 18, 19 years old and attending classes, taking literature classes, and repeatedly surprised by people not picking up on references to Bible stories. I grew up believing this is universal. It's what's water? This is water kind of thing. Everybody I knew all of the Bible stories, which culminated, of course, in taking a Milton class and having most of my classmates totally unfamiliar with any details of the Bible story and very often unfamiliar with the broad outlines. And so the professor throwing up his hands in exasperation and having to explain Genesis 1 and 2 and frustrated because he can't believe he has to introduce college students, upper division college students, to Genesis 1 and 2.
Yeah. I'm going to say Milton will not make a lot of sense if you're unfamiliar with the Bible.
Yes. And this is where it's like, these are not subtle, obscure references. I have a copy of, sorry, I'm digressing far too much, but I have a copy of Milton's Paradise Lost that has every biblical reference and allusion footnoted. And the editor did just a phenomenal job because he reviewed not just one edition or version. He looked for phrasing similarities across 16 different translations in order to identify as many references as possible. And it's a fairly fat book, and typically the poem is the top 4 or 5 lines of the page, and the rest is tiny font footnote. Anyway, I really appreciate that you brought this up because I think this is a strong connection.
So out of the three Bibliomen that we covered today, how would you rank them as far as which ones you enjoyed?
Well, I think Rishi is the most interesting story. It has that wisdom literature, legend of the wise master. It's a little playful. And so I found it the most enjoyable as a story. But character-wise, I think Price is my favorite of the characters. That hunt for secret knowledge, that aspect of it, but also the hunt for a specific book. I recognized him.
Yeah. Okay.
How about you?
I'd put Rishi first and then Price and then Rico. I feel bad putting Rico down there, but at the same time, I find him interesting in the fact that why did Wolfe find
Right.
that interesting?
Interesting more in an abstract sense than in a narrative sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The Unreliable Narrators are Amanda Patchen and Brent Towle. And, as Gene Wolfe said, is it telling when the one you tell doesn't understand?
Keep